The desert didn't hum that morning. It mourned that a low wind crawled across the plains, dragging its fingers through sand and bone, whispering over the graveyard of dry sage. Dust hung in the air like breath held too long. Somewhere far off, a hawk circled, the only creature left with enough courage to rise above this land of rust and silence. On the long, winding road to Ironhold Prison, a wagon creaked its tired song. The wheels groaned, metal against stone, as if even they resented where they were headed. Inside sat a small child, no older than 7. Her name, though the world hardly remembered it yet, was Lydia. She clutched a rag doll with one arm, its button eyes uneven, its hair made of old thread, and with her other hand she traced patterns in the dust that drifted through the open slats of the wagon. Her dress was sun-faded, and her shoes, once white, had learned the color of the road. Beside her sat Warden Amos Hale, a man built like the stone walls he ruled. His beard was gray, his skin leathered by years of judgment and desert light. His face rarely bent toward a smile, not from cruelty, but from habit. Duty had stripped him of softness long ago. Yet, when Lydia had come to him after her parents' passing, his sister's only child, something in him had cracked, just a little. She was all that tethered him now to gentleness. As the wagon approached the gates, he looked down at her. "You ever been inside a prison, child?" She shook her head, her doll pressed tight to her chest. "It's not a place for dreams," he said, more to himself than her. "But you can visit today, long as you stay close." Ironhold Prison rose from the desert like a scar stitched into the earth, stone upon stone, built by hands that never stopped shaking. The metal gates loomed tall, blackened by sun and storm. They groaned open at the warden's command, the sound deep and mournful. Inside, the air changed. The scent of hot dust was replaced by something heavier, sweat, rust, and the faint, ghostly trace of gunpowder. Chains clinked. A voice coughed somewhere in the dark. The men lined up along the courtyard wall, their faces hollowed by time. Some glared. Some looked away. Others, the dangerous kind, smiled with teeth yellowed by neglect. Lydia watched them in silence, her small hand curling tighter around her doll. To distract her from the gloom. Warden Hale, clumsy in comfort, forced a chuckle. "Well now," he said softly, "what if we made a little game of it, HM? Pick any prisoner you like. Just for pretend. I'll show you their cell, tell you their story. Make the day pass quicker." He expected her to giggle, to point at a harmless old drunk or the one-armed horse thief who whittled wooden birds in his cell. But Lydia didn't smile. Her gaze moved slowly across the line, not with curiosity, but with an ache too deep for her age. Her lips parted, then closed again. Her eyes, the same gray-green as storm clouds, seemed to look through the men, as if searching for something lost. The prisoners shifted uneasily under her stare. One muttered a prayer. Another turned away. And then Lydia froze. Her small finger lifted, trembling, and pointed toward the end of the line. A woman stood there, wrists bound in iron, face half-shadowed by the brim of a slouched hat. Her hair was long, tangled, streaked with ash. Dust clung to her torn sleeves, and her eyes, weary, sharp, and beautiful in their defiance, met the child's gaze like a mirror long forgotten. No one spoke. The warden frowned. "That one," he asked softly, "you don't want." But Lydia didn't let him finish. Her voice, barely more than breath, trembled out between her lips. "Mama." The word fell into the silence like a match into dry grass. The courtyard stilled. Even the wind outside the prison seemed to halt, listening. Warden Hale's heart stumbled in his chest. He stared at the child, then at the woman, then back again, disbelief warring with memory. The name on that prisoner's file, Alara Boone, echoed in his mind. He remembered the trial, the accusations, the night her ranch burned. He remembered the way she'd stood before the judge, eyes burning with the same storm he saw now in the child's. That no one had told him she'd had a daughter. The woman's breath caught. The chains on her wrists clinked softly as she took a half-step forward before the guard's hand shoved her back. "Sir," one of the deputies whispered, uncertain, "you want me to move the kid away?" But the warden raised a hand. He couldn't speak. Delara's eyes softened, just for a moment, before they broke entirely. Her lips trembled as if they remembered the feel of a lullaby they'd once sung to sleep. Lydia let go of her doll. It fell into the dirt between them, face down, That single drop of silence, a heartbeat long, stretched into eternity. The warden turned away, jaw tight, the weight of something unholy pressing into his chest. For all his years of keeping law and order, no crime had ever felt so cruel as this. A mother and child divided by chains he himself commanded. As he walked back to his office, the sound of the child's whisper followed him, the sound of truth breaking through stone. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling through the cracks of iron hold like a song of the dead. And somewhere deep within the prison walls, Alara Boone pressed her forehead to the cold iron bars and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. The desert had taken all her tears years ago, but when she breathed, her breath carried one word, so soft it vanished into the dusk: Lydia. Night in Ironhold was not made of darkness alone. It was made of memory. The walls didn't just stand. They listened. They remembered every name ever whispered in fear, every sob that went unanswered, every dream traded for a sliver of bread and another sunrise. The air inside those stone ribs was thick, heavy as guilt. Alara Boone sat in her cell, knees drawn close, tracing invisible circles on the floor. The torchlight outside flickered in uneven rhythm, spilling gold across the iron bars before retreating into shadow again, as if even light was afraid to stay too long. 7 years. That's how long she'd been here. Long enough for her voice to forget how laughter sounded. Her hands were calloused from labor, laundry, kitchen work, moving crates too heavy for bones so small. Yet, there was a grace in her even now, in the way she folded her rags neatly, the way she spoke softly to no one, as if trying to calm the ghosts that lived with her. And tonight, for the first time in all those years, she'd seen her child. The memory replayed endlessly. That tiny voice, trembling but sure, saying mama, that a single word that unraveled every wall she'd built inside herself to survive. Outside her cell, a voice broke through the hush, rough, tired, but kind. Can't sleep either? It was old Matty, the prison cook. His back was bent like a question mark, his beard yellowed by tobacco, his eyes small but sharp. He was the closest thing Ironhold had to mercy. He carried a chipped mug of coffee in one hand, steam curling like thin ghosts. Alara looked up from the shadows. "Sleep's a stranger," she murmured. Matty chuckled softly, sliding the mug through the bars. "Then let it stay that way tonight. You'll want to be awake to remember this day." She hesitated before taking it, wrapping her thin fingers around the warmth. "You saw her?" "I did," he said, leaning on his cane. "Little thing, ain't she? Looked like the kind of girl that makes the sun rise just by smiling." Alara's lips trembled. She knew me. Of course she did. A child never forgets the sound of her mother's heart, no matter how many walls you build between them. Matty walked away before she could answer, his shadow stretching long in the corridor. The cell grew quiet again. The coffee cooled. The torch flickered. And in the next breath, a different presence filled the hall. Quieter, steadier. Dr. Harlan Wells, the prison's medic. A man who spoke rarely and listened deeply. He was a widower, his wife, gone to fever years before. He carried that loss in his eyes, though he hid it well behind his soft-spoken calm. He stopped outside her cell, holding a small lantern. "You should rest," he said. "I forgot how," she replied. He set the lantern on the floor, light pooling gently between them. "Then talk instead. Talking's a kind of rest too." Alara studied him, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. Trust had become a luxury she could no longer afford. But there was something in Harlan's voice, that quiet steadiness, that felt less like pity and more like understanding. "You've read my file," she said. He nodded. "I've read words. Words don't mean truth." Her eyes softened. "You believe I'm innocent?" "I believe you don't deserve to be forgotten," he said simply. The lantern flame danced. Alara turned her gaze toward the small window high above her bed. Through it, the moonlight painted thin lines across the cell, like bars drawn in silver. "I had a home once," she whispered. "A little ranch near Willow Creek. The land was dry, but it was ours. My husband, Caleb, he built it with his own hands. We worked till our skin burned, but at night he'd still find the strength to dance with me on the porch. He said the desert couldn't take everything if we kept laughing." Her voice faltered. Then came the fire. She told it slowly, how outlaws raided nearby settlements, how someone had accused Caleb of hiding them, how the sheriff and his men had come too late, how the night turned to smoke and gunfire. Caleb had died defending their home. And when the flames died down, they found Alara kneeling beside him, soot on her face, a pistol in her hand, the stolen silver of a dead raider at her feet. And one believed her story, that the gun wasn't hers, that she had been framed. Not even the man who led the investigation, Amos Hale, now the warden of Ironhold. Dr. Harlan said nothing for a long time. His silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that listens. Finally, he spoke. I remember that fire. I was a young medic then. They brought in a wounded outlaw. Died before dawn. Said something strange before he went. Alara's head lifted. What did he say? We took the wrong house. The words lingered in the air like embers refusing to die. For the first time in years, hope didn't feel like cruelty. It felt possible. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. The warden's voice barked orders in the distance, commanding guards, counting heads. Dr. Harlan stood. You should rest now, Alara. Tomorrow may bring questions. Do you think he knows? She asked softly. The warden? He met her eyes. He will. The truth's got a way of finding the cracks. He turned to leave, pausing only once more. You said your girl's name is Lydia? Alara nodded. She's got your eyes, he said gently. That kind of courage doesn't fade. It just waits for a reason to return. When he was gone, Alara lay down, the rough blanket barely covering her shoulders. The night crept through the window, bringing with it a soft wind that smelled faintly of rain, or maybe just the promise of it. She closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the prison breathing around her. Chains clinking, guards pacing, rats whispering secrets in the walls. Somewhere in the distance, a child's voice echoed in her memory, calling her name, Mama. Alara smiled, just a ghost of a smile. It felt foreign on her lips. Maybe the world had not forgotten her after all. And in the dark, where no one could see, she whispered a prayer, not for freedom, but for one more sunrise to look into her daughter's eyes again. The wind outside shifted, soft and low, carrying her whisper into the endless desert. It sounded almost like a promise. The rain came before dawn. Not a storm, just a quiet, hesitant drizzle that felt like the desert was learning how to weep again. The drops tapped gently against the tin roof of Ironhold, sliding down in uneven trails, washing rust from hinges and dust from windows. For 7 years, Alara Boone had waited for that sound. The sky's forgiveness. She woke to it softly, her hand resting against the damp stone wall, her breath steady for the first time in years. Somewhere down the corridor, old Maddie was muttering a prayer of gratitude to no one in particular, and even the guards moved slower, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace. But for Warden Amos Hale, sleep hadn't come at all. That he sat alone in his office, a cramped room of papers, keys, and ghosts, staring at an open file that smelled of age and dust. The ink had faded, but the signatures still burned like scars. The report of the Willow Creek raid lay before him. A husband dead, a wife condemned, property seized. He had written those words that he had sent her here. Outside his window, the rain slid down the glass like tears too proud to fall. He ran a hand through his hair, gray and coarse, and reached for another file. One Dr. Harlan had brought him earlier that evening. That it contained a single sheet. A statement written by a dying outlaw 7 years ago. We took the wrong house. Amos read it again and again until the words blurred into one another, until they stopped being ink and became confession. That he stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. His badge glinted dully in the lamplight. For the first time in a long while, he hated the weight of it. The door creaked open. Dr. Harlan stepped inside, carrying a lantern and the same quiet that followed him everywhere. You've read it? He asked. The warden nodded slowly. Every line. I thought you should know. I found it buried under the old records. It was never filed, never seen. Who signed off the arrest? Your deputy back then, Wilkes. Amos's jaw tightened. Deputy Wilkes, long gone now, disappeared after a gunfight in Santa Fe. Dead men kept secrets better than living ones. The warden sank into his chair again, eyes on the flame of the lantern. 7 years, he whispered. 7 years she's lived a lie because I didn't look closer. Harlan's voice was calm, almost gentle. You can still look now. The warden turned toward him, his face drawn, haunted. You think she'll forgive me? No, Harlan said softly. But that's not why you should set her free. By mid-morning, The rain had turned the courtyard into a field of mud. Guards huddled under the eaves, their hats dripping. Lydia, the small child who had whispered "Mama," sat on the edge of a bench near the gate, tracing her doll's face with careful fingers. Her uncle, the warden, watched her from the doorway. He couldn't bring himself to speak. When she looked up and smiled at him, something inside him broke open. That same smile had lived once on her mother's face. Before the fire, before the bars, before he'd let the law blind him to mercy. He reached for his hat and walked into the rain. The guards straightened at his approach. "Bring me prisoner Elara Boone," he ordered. No shackles. The men exchanged uneasy looks, but none dared question. Within minutes, she appeared at the far end of the yard, her clothes soaked, hair clinging to her neck, eyes sharp with confusion. The gate creaked open. For a moment, she hesitated, as if afraid this was another cruel trick of the warden's making. But the sound of her daughter's voice, "Mama," shattered her fear. Lydia ran through the rain, her small boots splashing through puddles, her arms open wide. The warden watched as Elara dropped to her knees in the mud and caught her child, clutching her so tightly it seemed she might never let go again. The world around them fell silent. Only the rain spoke now, whispering forgiveness across the yard. When Elara finally lifted her gaze, she saw Amos standing there, the prison keys in his hand, his expression hollow. "I read the report," he said quietly. "Wilkes forged the evidence. You were never guilty, Elara. I should have known." Her voice trembled, but not from anger. "And now you do." He nodded. "I'll have your papers signed. You'll walk free before sunset." She rose slowly, holding Lydia's hand. "Freedom's a strange thing, Warden. It don't undo what's been done." "I know," he said, "but maybe it can stop what's still being done to others." He handed her a folded letter, the official release, and turned away before his voice could break the by evening. The rain had softened to a mist. The desert smelled alive again, and the sky blushed faintly gold as the sun returned. Elara stood just outside the gates of Untold, her hand resting on Lydia's shoulder. The weight of chains was gone, but their memory still pressed against her skin like an old bruised doctor. Harlan approached, his hat low against the drizzle. He carried a small bag, bread, water, a blanket. "For the road," he said simply. She met his gaze, and for the first time, she smiled without pain. "You were the only one who listened." "I only reminded them you still had a voice," he said. "You did the rest." Lydia tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, are we going home?" Elara knelt, brushing wet strands from the girl's face. "Home's wherever you're safe, my love. We'll find it." She turned back toward the prison one last time. The warden stood at the entrance, watching them through the mist, hat pressed against his chest. Their eyes met across the distance. A silent exchange between guilt and grace. Then she took her daughter's hand, and together they walked down the long dirt road, where puddles caught the fading light like mirrors of heaven. The rain followed them for a while, soft and steady, as though unwilling to let go. Behind them, Untold stood quieter than it ever had before. No chains clanged. No orders barked. Even the wind seemed changed, gentler, almost kind. The warden lingered in the yard long after they were gone, the release papers damp in his pocket. The badge on his chest felt heavier than ever. Doctor. Harlan joined him, his voice barely above the whisper of rain. "You did what needed doing." Amos shook his head. "Too late." "Maybe," Harlan said, "but sometimes too late is still better than never." The warden looked toward the horizon, where a faint rainbow bled through the clouds. "She said the sky forgave me first," he murmured. Maybe she was right. Far down the road, Elara paused, turning back one last time. The prison walls stood dark against the light, but beyond them, she saw the faint shimmer of color breaking through the storm. She whispered to the wind, voice soft and certain, "Goodbye, Untold." And with that, she and her child walked toward the horizon, two silhouettes stitched together by rain and light, by loss and love, by the unbroken thread of faith that had survived it all. For the first time in years, Elara Boone didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like a woman who had kept her soul alive through fire. And that, she thought, was freedom enough. The rains left behind a world reborn. The desert, once cracked and pale as bone, now glimmered with soft puddles that caught the light like pieces of fallen sky. Grass peeked through the earth's old wounds. The wind, once a lonely howl, carried the scent of sage and distant blossoms, and somewhere along that same road, the one that had led her into darkness and back again, Elara Boone found herself free. Weeks had passed since Ironhold's gates had closed behind her. She lived now at the edge of a small valley, where the land sloped gently toward a narrow creek. Dr. Harlan Wells had offered her a small cabin on his farm, a quiet place surrounded by cottonwoods and the hum of bees. Here, she learned how to breathe again. Each morning she rose before dawn, the hem of her dress brushing dew from the grass. She fetched water from the well, baked bread, and watched Lydia chase butterflies in the tall meadow. There was laughter in the child's voice again, a sound so pure it could heal the world if it wanted it. At first, Elara did not know what to do with peace. It felt like a fragile bird that might fly away if she looked too hard at it. But day by day, it stayed. Dr. Harlan came by often, carrying herbs, books, or just silence. He would sit on the porch while Elara mended clothes or fed the chickens, and together they let the quiet speak for them. Sometimes she'd ask about the others, old Matty, the guards, even the warden. Harlan would smile softly. Ironhold's quieter these days. Amos, he resigned, left his badge behind. I think he's somewhere out east, starting over. She would nod, eyes lowered, unsure whether to feel sorrow or forgiveness. In time, she realized both were the same thing. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she stood outside with her hands deep in the soil, planting small wildflowers Lydia had gathered. The air was warm, painted gold and rose. Harlan came to stand beside her, sleeves rolled up, helping her press the seeds into the earth. I never thought I'd have a garden again, she said softly. He looked at her, a faint smile at the edge of his lips. You always had one. You just kept it alive inside you. They worked until the stars began to show. Then, as the last bit of light faded, Lydia ran up from the field, her hair tangled with petals, her laughter echoing against the hills. Elara knelt and caught her in her arms. You've got dirt all over you, she teased. Lydia grinned, holding up a handful of fireflies she'd trapped gently between her palms. I caught the stars, Mama. Elara opened her daughter's hands and watched the tiny lights drift upward into the dusk. Don't keep them, she whispered. Even light needs to be free. The fireflies rose and disappeared among the stars, small souls returning home. For a moment, time stood still. The air was full of life, of forgiveness, of something larger than words. Elara looked toward the horizon, where the desert once held only dust, and thought of all she had lost and all she had found. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had softened into meaning. She spoke quietly, her words meant for no one and everyone. Some stories begin in chains, she said, but end in grace. Sometimes the world breaks you just to see what light can grow through the cracks. Harlan heard her and nodded once, eyes glistening in the fading light. That night, as the crickets began to sing and the stars thickened overhead, Elara sat on the porch, Lydia asleep in her lap. The air smelled of earth and rain and promise. She looked up at the vast, forgiving sky and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because it was real. And maybe that was all she ever needed. If this story found its way to you, if it stirred something quiet inside your chest, let it remind you, even in the harshest deserts, rain can still come. Even the broken can bloom again. Tell us where you're watching from, what sky you live under tonight. And if you believe in second chances, in forgiveness, in love that survives the ashes, leave a light for Elara and Lydia below.